It's week 16 of the 2014 season. In the pouring rain in Cincinnati, C.J. Anderson is about to take a handoff for 27 yards, capping off an impressive 138 all-purpose yards, 8 receptions, and a touchdown, and most importantly, winning people all over the world their fantasy championship. How did we get here? It's time for a Fantasy Football Rewind. Going into the 2014 season, the Broncos' backfield was going to see a new lead running back after their leading rusher and top 5 fantasy running back from the previous year, Knowshon Moreno, left for the Dolphins in the offseason. In 2013, Knowshon Moreno led the high-powered Broncos offense with 1,548 all-purpose yards and 13 total touchdowns. With everyone expecting another dynamic offensive showing from the Broncos and their top running back on a new team, fantasy managers began hyping up Knowshon Moreno's heir apparent, Monty Ball. Wait, that can't be right. The story's about C.J. Anderson. Jeez, C.J. Anderson was listed 3rd on the Broncos' first depth chart to start the season. Well, this should be an interesting story. Monty Ball was a decorated college running back, having won 2 Jim Brown Awards, which are given to the NCAA's top running back, 1 Archie Griffin Award, given to college football's most valuable player for an entire season, and a Big Ten Offensive Player of the Year. In 2013, when Knowshon Moreno was tearing up the field, Monty Ball's rookie campaign was showing a lot of promise, racking up 559 rushing yards on only 120 attempts with 4 touchdowns. With Ball only seeing about 25% of the snaps his rookie year, there was a lot to be excited for. Because of his pedigree and the Broncos' mighty offense, Monty Ball was being drafted in the 2nd round as a top 10 running back, compared to backups Ronnie Hillman and C.J. Anderson, who were going undrafted in most 10 and 12 team leagues. Many fantasy analysts had Ball as a favorite for a breakout, but in the first 3 weeks of the season, Ball had only tallied 135 yards rushing and 1 touchdown. This put him at running back 24 and 25 in standard and PPR leagues respectively. Being a first-round pick and barely flex-worthy was a huge blow to fantasy owners who drafted Monty Ball on all the offseason hype. A final nail in the coffin for fantasy owners came next week, where Monty Ball suffered a groin injury, taking him out of the game. When Ball went down week 5, Ronnie Hillman took the bulk of the work, rushing 15 times for 64 yards, while C.J. Anderson was inactive that week. This led to Hillman being a waiver wire pickup target for the Broncos' backfield going into week 6. Fantasy analysts had Hillman as a pickup that could be an RB2 or 3. You'll notice another big name for 2014 that was a waiver wire ad for this week, but I'll save that story for another time. Hillman took over the backfield starting week 6, and from week 6 through 9, Hillman was the 4th overall fantasy running back, posting stats of 100 yards rushing, 16 yards receiving, 74 yards rushing, 29 yards receiving with 2 touchdowns, 109 yards rushing and 29 yards receiving, and 16 yards rushing, 47 yards receiving, and 2 touchdowns. Through these 4 weeks, Hillman saw 50-plus snaps a game in all but 1 game, which was a blowout, and was looking like a great late-round or waiver wire grab himself. That was until week 10, when Hillman suffered a left foot injury. After this injury, C.J. Anderson came into the game with a breakout performance of 90 rushing yards, 73 receiving yards, and a touchdown. This breakout gave Anderson the 3rd best running back performance of the week and 7th highest score of all positions. Heading into week 11, C.J. Anderson was one of the top waiver wire pickup suggestions. Some analysts had hesitancy as Ronnie Hillman was only supposed to be out 2 weeks and Monty Ball was supposed to be back in a week. Clearly the lead running back in the Broncos' backfield had tremendous value, but who was going to be the starter for the rest of the season? That question was answered in week 11 with C.J. Anderson posting a double-digit fantasy performance with 29 rushing yards, 86 receiving yards, and no touchdowns. The usage included with the 8 receptions on 10 targets, added to Monty Ball re-injuring his groin, shot Anderson to a must-start fantasy asset, and if he wasn't picked up in a league, it would be too late. Week 12 started off what would be an incredible end-of-season run for a budding league-winning waiver wire pickup. That week, C.J. Anderson saw 89% of Broncos snaps, rushing for 167 yards and a touchdown, which was good for a top 3 running back finish. C.J. Anderson picked up right where he left off in Week 13, playing a season-high 70 snaps against the Kansas City Chiefs. Anderson racked up 168 yards rushing, outdoing his last week performance by 1 yard, and adding 17 receiving yards and a touchdown on 2 receptions. This massive stat line gave C.J. Anderson back-to-back top 3 running back finishes in both standard and PPR scoring. C.J. Anderson was getting hot right before the fantasy playoffs and rewarding fantasy managers who took the chance on him. This unbelievable run would continue through the fantasy playoffs and championship, with C.J. Anderson posting top 5 running back weeks in 3 of the last 4 weeks of the season, including 2 3-touchdown performances in Week 14 and 17. The 1 week C.J. Anderson did not post a top 5 score, he was still a running back 2, which, let's be honest, is good for a late season waiver wire pickup. Once C.J. Anderson took over in Week 11 through the remainder of the season, he was the number 2 overall scoring running back in both standard and PPR scoring, only 5 and 7 points behind Le'Veon Bell respectively. For context, Le'Veon Bell was a second-round pick in fantasy drafts to start the year. Whether your championship game was Week 16 or 17, you were getting insane running back value on someone that could be picked up off the waiver wire through the first 11 weeks of the season. The consistency, coupled with how late you could actually pick up C.J. Anderson, make him one of the best waiver wire pickups in fantasy football history.